The metal walls of the alien ship hummed like a sleeping beast. Deep in its lower decks, behind glowing energy bars, sat the first human ever captured by the Zirath Dominion. His name was Lieutenant Eric Hale, and for the last 7 days he had not said much at all. The Zarath guards found him strange. He never begged for food. He never shouted. He only asked for water once, with quiet politeness. When they looked into his cell, he was always doing something, turning a small screw between his fingers, humming softly, or staring at the ceiling as if trying to remember something far away. To the Zarath, who valued silence as weakness and calm as submission, he seemed broken, but one of them knew better. Seraphin, daughter of Admiral Veylan, stood outside the human cell, her pale eyes studying him through the glowing blue light. She was young by Zirath standards, only 80 cycles old, but already trained in the art of empathy, the power to sense and influence the minds of others. It was how the Zarath maintained control of their vast empire, by reading the emotions of those they ruled. Yet this human, he was different. She reached out with her mind, brushing against the edges of his thoughts. Where she expected fear, she felt only a wall. It wasn't anger or emptiness, it was steady, like a mountain in a storm. When she pushed harder, she felt something inside him pushing back. It startled her. She lowered her hand and frowned. "Strange creature," she said aloud. "You should be trembling." Eric looked up slowly. His blue-gray eyes met hers, calm but sharp. "I've done enough trembling in my life," he said in a quiet voice. "Doesn't help much." His voice carried a roughness that reminded her of sand scraping against stone. It wasn't defiant, just matter-of-fact. "You are a prisoner of the Zirath Dominion," Seraphin said, straightening her back. "Your people lost the battle on Vesta 9. Your fate is ours to decide." "I figured," he said. "Still, I'm alive. That counts for something." Seraphin tilted her head, unsure how to respond. She had spoken with hundreds of prisoners before, soldiers, rebels, spies, but all of them broke quickly. They cried, they screamed, they begged for release. Fear was something all living beings shared, all except, it seemed, this human. She turned away and walked to the control panel near the door. Her aide, a young officer named Krall, stood beside her, watching with nervous eyes. "Do you want me to prepare the neural probe, my lady?" Krall asked. Seraphin hesitated. The neural probe was standard procedure. It allowed the Zirath to extract memories, thoughts, and feelings. But something in her told her that wouldn't work here. She wanted to understand first. "No," she said finally. "I'll speak with him again." Krall blinked. "He is only human, Seraphin. Why waste time?" "Because he doesn't act like one," she said softly. She returned to the cell. Eric was now sitting cross-legged on the floor, his back against the wall. His uniform was torn and dirty, the insignia of the Terran Defense Fleet half burned away. Yet his posture was relaxed, almost peaceful. "You do not fear death?" Seraphin asked him. Eric shrugged. "Everyone fears it a little. I just don't let it run the show. Your species is fragile. Your minds are soft. How do you resist us?" He gave a faint smile. "Soft doesn't mean weak. Ever seen grass after a storm? Still standing." She didn't understand the words, but she could feel something behind them. A quiet strength that was not pride but endurance. She decided to test him. She pressed a button on the control panel, lowering the temperature in the cell. Frost began to creep across the floor. The human shivered but said nothing. After a few minutes, his breath came out in small clouds. He rubbed his hands together, but his gaze never left her. "Does this frighten you?" she asked. "No," he said through chattering teeth. "Reminds me of home." "What kind of home is that?" "Cold," he said, smiling faintly, "but worth fighting for." Seraphin stopped the test. She was growing more curious by the second. No creature she'd ever met could keep their emotions this steady under pressure. The Zarath had conquered dozens of worlds, each full of species that eventually learned to kneel. Yet this one human soldier, alone and beaten, spoke like he still had an army behind him. "Why did you come to Vesta 9? She asked. "You knew you could not win." "Maybe not," Eric admitted. "But if we didn't try, there'd be no one left to fight the next battle. Sometimes you stand because standing matters." She looked at him, trying to see the logic in his words. There was none. Zirath philosophy taught that all struggle should serve a purpose. To fight when defeat was certain was madness, and yet his madness felt admirable. Her father's voice echoed in her head. His lectures about order, control, and obedience. The Dominion thrives because fear keeps the stars quiet. Yet here was proof that fear didn't always work. Your people are strange, she said. You fight when you cannot win. You smile when you are dying. You should be afraid of us. Eric's smile faded, replaced by a calm seriousness. I've seen what happens when you give in to fear. You stop being yourself. You stop living. I'd rather die as me than live as something else. For a moment, Seraphim had no reply. The words hung in the cold air between them, heavy and honest. She could feel his emotions now, not because he let her in, but because he didn't hide them. They were bright and sharp like fire, impossible to control. It made her feel small. When she left the cell, her thoughts were clouded. She returned to the command deck, where Admiral Valen stood watching a holographic map of nearby human colonies. Your session is complete? He asked, his voice deep and stern. Yes, Father, she said quietly. He resists psychic contact. His mental walls are strong. The Admiral turned, his crimson eyes narrowing. Then break him. The others must see that humans are no exception. Seraphim hesitated. Permission to continue psychological study before— No, he cut her off. You are too soft. This is not a pet to be studied. It is a tool to be dismantled. She bowed her head but said nothing. Inside, she felt something twisting. When she returned to her quarters, she couldn't stop thinking about the human's eyes. How steady they were. How they looked right through her without hate or fear. That night, she couldn't sleep. In Zirath culture, emotions were considered dangerous, something to suppress and control. But the human's words kept echoing in her mind. You stop being yourself. The next morning, she went back to his cell against her father's orders. Eric was awake, leaning against the wall again, humming quietly. It was a tune she didn't recognize, slow and almost sad. What song is that? She asked. He looked up, surprised she returned. It's called a lullaby. Something mothers sing to children so they can sleep. We do not sing to our young, she said. We teach them discipline. Sounds lonely. She blinked. Lonely? Yeah, he said, tilting his head. You know that feeling when you're surrounded by people but none of them really see you? She frowned. That is irrelevant. We do not seek to be seen. We seek to serve, Eric chuckled softly. And you think we're strange? Seraphim felt an odd heat rise in her face, a Zerath version of embarrassment. She didn't like that feeling, yet it didn't feel entirely bad either. You are impossible to understand, she muttered. Maybe, he said. But understanding isn't needed to respect something. Respect? She repeated. Yeah, Eric said, leaning forward. You don't have to like your enemy, but if you don't respect them, you'll never really beat them. Seraphim fell silent. No one had ever spoken to her like that, like she was just another person. Not the daughter of an admiral, not a telepathic prodigy, just someone trying to understand. After a moment, she asked again, softer this time. Why don't you tremble, human? He looked at her with a tired but steady gaze. Because I've already seen worse, he said. And I'm still here. Those words stayed with her long after she left. For the first time in her life, Seraphim felt a tremor. Not of fear, but of realization. Maybe the most dangerous thing in the galaxy wasn't a weapon or a psychic army. Maybe it was something much smaller. Something that refused to bow. Something human. The cell felt quieter than usual. The low hum of the engines was the only sound. Eric Hale sat on the floor, his head bowed as he carefully shaped a piece of wire into a ring. It wasn't much, just a bit of metal he'd found from the floor vent. But his hands moved with patience. He didn't know why he was making it. Maybe it was something to keep his mind steady. Maybe it reminded him of home. Outside the transparent wall, Seraphim watched him again. She told herself she was studying him, but the truth was different. Something about this human made her feel unsettled. Not in the way fear unsettled, but in the way curiosity does when you know the answer might change you. For the last few days, she had been disobeying her father's orders. She came down secretly, sometimes at night, to speak with the prisoner. Every time she left, she felt more confused. She pressed the button to open the intercom. What are you making? She asked. Eric looked up, the faintest smile on his face. A ring, for luck, maybe. You believe in luck? He chuckled softly. Not really, but sometimes it helps to believe in something. Keeps you steady, Seraphim frowned. Belief is a weakness. It clouds judgment. He turned the ring in his fingers. Funny. I think belief is what keeps us from falling apart. She didn't reply. She didn't understand this way of thinking. The Zerath believed in control, not hope. Control made order. Hope created chaos. Yet this human, sitting behind a wall with nothing left, still spoke like someone who had the universe in his hands. After a long silence, she said, "My father wants to test you again." "I figured," Eric said. "That's what generals do, right?" "He is an admiral," she corrected automatically. Then her tone softened. "He does not like things he cannot explain. You are one of those things." Eric smiled faintly. "Guess that makes me a problem." "Yes," she admitted quietly. "A very dangerous one." Later that day, the guards came. 2 tall Zerath soldiers entered the cell and pulled Eric to his feet. He didn't resist. He walked calmly between them, even when they fastened the restraints around his wrists. Seraphine followed behind, her steps slow, her thoughts uneasy. They led him to the central chamber, a vast circular hall filled with cold light and rows of watching eyes. Officers, soldiers, and technicians gathered around a platform in the center. Above it floated a silver device with glowing tendrils, the pain field. Seraphine had seen it used many times. It didn't leave scars. It didn't even touch the body. It simply reached into the nerves, the mind, the memory, turning pain into something deeper, something that broke the will itself. No creature had ever lasted more than a few minutes. Eric stood on the platform. His eyes wandered over the watching crowd. He looked small, a single man surrounded by an empire that ruled hundreds of worlds, but there was no fear in his face. The admiral entered then, tall and sharp, his uniform black as the void. His red eyes glowed with power. "Human," he said coldly. "You have resisted our probes, our empathy, and our questions. You will not resist the truth. When we are done, you will kneel." Eric met his gaze. "Maybe," he said simply. "But probably not." A murmur spread through the room. No one had ever spoken to the admiral like that. Seraphine felt her heart tighten. She wanted to say something, but she stayed silent. The admiral raised his hand. The device hummed to life. A field of shimmering light surrounded Eric. His body stiffened. The pain field began. For a few seconds, nothing happened. Then Eric's muscles tensed. His breathing grew harsh. The energy crawled over his skin like invisible fire. Seraphine could feel his mind through the air. It burned bright, full of pressure and agony. But still he stood. His knees bent slightly, but he didn't fall. The field intensified. His jaw clenched, his teeth grinding together. Sweat rolled down his face, his whole body shaking. The admiral smiled. "You see? Even the strongest creatures bow eventually." But then Eric lifted his head. His eyes locked on Seraphine. Through the pain, he gave her the smallest, almost broken smile. His voice was weak but steady. "You'll have to do better." Gasps filled the chamber. The admiral's expression turned dark. He increased the field again. The air shimmered hotter. The hum deepened, and the smell of burnt metal filled the room. Eric's body trembled, his legs almost giving out. For a heartbeat, Seraphine thought he would collapse. But he didn't. He took one slow breath, then another. Seraphine felt it. The strange pulse of human emotion, not rage, not fear, but something she couldn't name. It was will. Pure, bright, painful will. He wasn't fighting for himself anymore. He was standing for something else, something unseen. "Enough," she shouted suddenly. "You'll kill him!" The admiral turned toward her, his eyes burning with anger. "You forget your place, Seraphine. I said enough," she repeated louder. The crowd froze. She had never spoken to her father like that. Her voice shook, but she didn't back down. The admiral lowered his hand slowly. The field flickered out. Eric collapsed to one knee, gasping for breath, his body shaking. The guards moved to lift him, but he waved them away. "I'm fine," he said hoarsely. He wasn't fine. His clothes were damp with sweat, and his skin was pale. But his eyes were still the same. Calm, defiant. The admiral stepped closer, looking down at him. "Why do you resist, human? What power drives you?" Eric wiped blood from his lip and looked up. "We don't like bullies," he said simply. The admiral stared at him for a long moment, then turned away in disgust. "Take him back to his cell. Let him rot." The guards dragged him out. Seraphine followed, her heart pounding. She had never felt this mix of fear and awe before. She had seen warriors scream under lesser pain, but he had endured it with nothing but stubbornness. Back in his cell, they left him on the floor. Seraphine entered once they were gone. Eric was breathing hard, one hand pressed against his chest. "You're insane," she whispered. He gave a weak laugh. "I get that a lot. You could have died. You should have screamed. Wouldn't have helped," he said. "Pain passes." "Shame doesn't." She stared at him. "Shame?" He nodded slowly. "If I broke just to make them happy, I'd never forgive myself. Better to hurt for a while than live with that forever." Seraphine crouched beside him. For a moment she wanted to reach out, to use her empathy to feel what he felt, but she didn't dare. She didn't want to invade that space. "You are a strange creature," she said quietly. "Maybe," he murmured. "But so are you," she frowned. "Me?" "Yeah," he said, managing a small smile. "You stopped him." "You didn't have to." Seraphine looked away. "I don't know why I did. Perhaps I was curious." "Curiosity's a good thing," he said softly. "Means you're still alive inside." She didn't understand, but she didn't argue. She sat there a while longer, watching him breathe, feeling the silence stretch between them. When she finally stood, she said, "My father will not forgive me for this. You've caused me trouble, human." "Sorry about that," Eric said, closing his eyes. "Trouble's kind of what we do." Despite herself, Seraphine almost smiled. Then she turned and left the cell, her mind spinning. That night, as the ship drifted through deep space, Seraphine couldn't sleep. She replayed the scene in her mind again and again, the human standing in that storm of pain unbroken. She felt something inside her shift, like a wall beginning to crack. The next morning, she stood before the viewing window, staring at the endless stars. For the first time, she wondered if her people were wrong. If fear was not the strongest force in the universe, then what was? When she closed her eyes, she saw Eric's face again, hurt, tired, but smiling. She whispered to the glass, "Why don't you tremble, human?" And somewhere below in his cold cell, the human slept, dreaming of Earth, of sunlight, of blue skies, of the sound of rain. Even in chains, he dreamed free. The next few days passed in uneasy silence. The dreadnought Savalta drifted through a region of dark space where no stars shone bright enough to touch its hull. The corridors felt colder, the air heavier. Everyone on board seemed to feel the same strange tension, as if something was waiting to happen. Seraphine spent most of her time in the lower decks, against her father's orders. She told herself she was monitoring the human prisoner, but deep inside she knew it wasn't duty anymore. It was curiosity. It was confusion. When she entered the cell block again, Eric was awake and sitting up. His wounds had started to heal, though his skin still showed the marks of the pain field. His eyes looked tired but alive. When he saw her, he smiled faintly. "Morning," he said. "Or whatever time it is on this ship." Seraphine stood at the door, arms crossed. "You should be resting." "I've had worse," he said. "Back on Vesta 9, I once spent 3 days under fire with no sleep." "This is luxury compared to that," she frowned. "You call this luxury?" He shrugged lightly. "I've got air, water, and no one shooting at me." "That's a start," she shook her head. "You make jokes in chains. I do not understand how." "It helps," he said, looking up at her. "If you stop laughing, you start giving up. And I'm not done yet." Seraphine stepped closer to the cell wall. "Why do you fight so hard when you know you cannot win? Your people are far weaker than ours. The Dominion has hundreds of fleets. Your colonies fall one by one. Logic says you should surrender." Eric looked at her with quiet patience. "Maybe, but logic doesn't build hope. People do. Every time someone stands up, it gives others a reason to try. That's how we survive." "Hope is a lie," Seraphine said quickly. "It blinds you from truth." He shook his head. "No, hope's what lets you see the truth and still keep walking." She didn't answer. She couldn't. His words didn't follow the rules of her world. For her people, control was everything. To lose control was to lose honor. But this human lived in chaos and somehow made it his strength. Later that day, alarms echoed through the corridors. The lights turned red. The deck vibrated as if something huge had struck the hull. Seraphine looked up sharply, feeling a sudden wave of confusion and fear spreading across the ship through her empathic senses. "Status," she called to a nearby officer. "Unknown ships on intercept course," he shouted. "They are not Dominion signals." Seraphine's heart raced. Human rescue ships? No, the Terran fleet was too far away. Whoever it was, they were attacking fast. The Admiral's voice roared through the ship's speakers. "All hands to battle stations. Seal all lower decks. Do not let the prisoner escape." Seraphine didn't think. She ran. She reached the detention area just as the lights flickered. A loud crash echoed from somewhere above. followed by the sound of metal tearing. When she reached Eric's cell, the power was already failing. The energy barrier sparked and died. He looked up at her, half surprised, half ready. Guess that alarm's not for show. Stay here, she ordered, but even as she said it, another explosion shook the deck. The ceiling cracked. A pipe burst, spilling steam into the hall. Eric stood. That sounded close. You cannot move, she snapped. If the guards find you outside the cell, they will kill you on sight. He looked at the smoke filling the corridor, then at her. And if we stay here, we burn. Pick your danger. Seraphine hesitated. She knew he was right. The ship's internal sensors were failing, and if the power conduits ignited, this whole section could be lost. She pressed a command on her wristband and unlocked the door. Follow me. Do not run, Eric smiled. Wasn't planning to. They moved together through the dim corridors. Emergency lights blinked along the walls, casting long, sharp shadows. The ship's hum was replaced by the deep groans of metal under strain. Who's attacking you? Eric asked as they moved. I do not know, she said. Perhaps rebels. Perhaps pirates. Or maybe your empire made too many enemies, he said under his breath. She shot him a look. You talk too much. Helps calm the nerves. They turned a corner and found a collapsed section blocking their way. Seraphine scanned the area quickly. We cannot pass. Eric crouched beside the rubble, examining it. I can move this. You are injured, she said sharply. You will make it worse, he grinned slightly. That's never stopped me before. Before she could stop him, he started pulling at the debris piece by piece. His hands bled from the sharp edges, but he didn't slow down. The sound of his rough breathing filled the narrow corridor. Seraphine watched him in disbelief. When the last piece fell aside, there was a narrow opening. There, he said, wiping sweat from his face. After you. She stared at him for a moment longer before crawling through. On the other side, she turned to help him, but he was already standing, his movement steady despite his injuries. You risked yourself, she said quietly. For me. He looked at her, puzzled. Of course I did. I am your captor. You're also a person, he said simply. And right now we're both in the same fire. Seraphine didn't know what to say. No one in the Dominion would ever do such a thing. Saving another being, especially an enemy, was seen as foolish sentiment. But this human didn't hesitate. They reached an intersection. One path led toward the control core, the other toward the escape bays. Go to the bays, she said. You can take a pod. What about you? I must reach the control room. If the ship's reactor fails, it could destroy everything in this sector. Eric hesitated. Then I'm coming with you. You're a prisoner, she reminded him. Yeah, but I'm also an engineer, he said. And you look like you could use a hand. She blinked at him. You would help your enemy? He gave a tired smile. We're not enemies right now. We're survivors. Let's fix the big problem first. Together they ran through the dim corridors. The sounds of battle grew louder. The crackle of energy weapons, the rumble of explosions, the screams of wounded soldiers. But Eric didn't flinch. He moved with calm focus, helping Seraphine lift fallen panels, guiding her through the smoke. At one point, they reached a control terminal. Sparks flew from it. We can reroute power here, Eric said, crouching down. Seraphine watched as his hands moved over the alien controls. He didn't know Zirath technology, yet he worked with surprising ease. You understand our systems? Not really, he said, prying open a panel. But logic's logic. Power in, power out. Doesn't matter if it's human or alien tech. It all runs on something that wants to move. Within minutes, lights flickered back on in the hallway. The deck's trembling slowed. Seraphine looked at him in awe. You did it. Team effort, he said, glancing at her. You kept us alive long enough for me to try. Her heart felt strange. It wasn't fear or confusion this time. It was something lighter, something she couldn't name. Before she could speak, the Admiral's voice thundered over the comms. Section 4 sealed. Reactor control has been compromised. All personnel evacuate immediately. Seraphine's eyes widened. He will abandon the ship. Not if we can stabilize the core first, Eric said. They ran again, turning corners until they reached the central chamber. The reactor pulsed wildly, arcs of blue energy shooting across the floor. The control panel was half destroyed. Seraphine started toward it, but an explosion threw her back. Eric caught her before she hit the ground. You all right? He asked. She nodded weakly. The controls are offline. We cannot stop it. He looked around quickly. eyes scanning the mess of wires and energy conduits. Maybe we can't stop it completely, but we can slow it down. Buy time for the others to escape. You would die for them? She asked in disbelief. He smiled. Someone has to stand when things fall apart, remember? Her breath caught. Those words echoed the ones he'd said before. He began pulling open panels, rerouting connections with his bare hands, ignoring the sparks that burned his skin. Seraphine helped him, her hands trembling as she fed power cables into new paths. Minutes passed. The core's energy began to stabilize. The alarms dimmed. It's working, she whispered. Yeah, he said, voice low. But it won't hold forever. She looked at him, eyes wide. You must come. We can still make it to the pods, he smiled faintly. Go, I'll catch up. You will not, she said firmly. He looked at her then, really looked, and for a moment neither spoke. The ship groaned around them, metal screaming like a dying beast. Seraphine finally said, If we live through this, I will never understand you. Eric laughed softly. You don't have to. Just remember what it feels like to keep going. The lights flickered again. She grabbed his arm. Then we go together. He hesitated, then nodded. Together. They ran through the smoke-filled corridor as the ship continued to shake. Behind them, the reactor roared like thunder. Ahead, the escape bay doors flickered weakly in the dim light. As they reached the airlock, Seraphine glanced back one last time at the ship that had been her whole life, the pride of the Dominion, now burning. And beside her, the human who refused to tremble still stood tall. For the first time, she didn't see him as a prisoner. She saw him as something else, something unstoppable, something human. The escape bay was half in ruins. Smoke filled the air and the floor tilted under their feet as the ship groaned. The mighty Savaltha, pride of the Zerath Dominion, was dying. Seraphine and Eric reached the airlock just as another explosion rocked the deck. Pieces of metal fell from above. Eric grabbed her hand and pulled her aside, shielding her as sparks rained down. She looked at him, wide-eyed. You could have left me. He smiled faintly. Yeah, that's not really my style. They stumbled toward the nearest escape pod. The control panel beside it flickered weakly. Seraphine touched the screen, trying to bring it online, but the system refused to respond. It's damaged, she said. The launch sequence won't start. Eric leaned over, studying the wiring. I can fix it, just need a minute. Be quick, she said, glancing nervously down the corridor. The ship was breaking apart, section by section. Through the viewport, the blackness of space shone like an open grave. Eric tore open the side panel and worked fast, connecting power cables and resetting circuits. Sparks flew, burning his fingers, but he didn't stop. You humans, she murmured. You break rules, you break machines, and somehow you keep surviving. Adapt or die, he said simply. The console flickered back to life. Got it. He stepped aside and gestured for her to enter. You first, she shook her head. You need it more than I do. I will find another pod. He gave her a look that made her chest tighten. Not happening. You go, I go. That's the deal. I do not understand you, she whispered. Good, he said with a grin. Keeps things interesting. Before either could move, the loudspeaker crackled with a harsh voice. Admiral Velan. Seraphine, he thundered. You are ordered to report to the command deck immediately. You have betrayed your post and aided the enemy. Seraphine froze. Eric looked at her, seeing the conflict in her eyes. Go, he said quietly. If you don't, he'll have you hunted. I'll hold him off. She shook her head. He will kill you. Maybe, Eric said, but I won't let him kill what's left of your ship. Her throat felt tight. Why? Why do you care? Because someone has to, he said. Because someone always should. Before she could argue, heavy footsteps echoed down the corridor. The Admiral appeared through the smoke, flanked by 2 armored guards. His crimson eyes burned with fury. So this is what my daughter has become, he said coldly. A traitor standing beside a primitive. Seraphine stepped forward. Father, stop this. The ship is lost. We can still escape together. He raised a hand. Silence. You have brought shame to our line. You speak of escape with filth at your side. Eric straightened, meeting the Admiral's glare without flinching. Nice to meet you too. The Admiral's face hardened. You should have died when we captured you. Yeah, Eric said. I get that a lot. Valen's voice deepened. You think pain makes you strong? You are nothing. An insect that learned to crawl through fire. Eric's eyes didn't waver. Maybe, but insects survive everything. The Admiral moved closer, his aura pulsing with psychic energy. Seraphine felt the wave of pressure roll through the air, cold, sharp, and suffocating. She gasped, feeling the force clawing at her mind. Eric didn't move. His body tensed, but his eyes stayed fixed on Valen. The psychic storm crashed against him, invisible but powerful. Seraphine cried out, "Stop, you'll kill him." Valen's voice was calm and cruel. He will kneel. But Eric didn't. He stood like a statue, breathing hard, his fists clenched. The psychic pressure cut deeper, searching for fear, for weakness. But there was none. He took a slow breath and said through gritted teeth, "You think fear makes you powerful. It just makes you blind." For the first time, the Admiral faltered. His concentration broke for a heartbeat. And in that moment, Seraphine reached out. Her empathic energy flared, meeting her father's and pushing it back. "Enough, father!" she shouted. "You taught me strength was control, but this is not strength, this is madness." He turned to her, eyes burning. "You would defy me for him?" She hesitated. "Not for him. For what he stands for." Valen raised his hand again, but Eric moved first. He tackled the nearest guard, disarming him and smashing the weapon into the floor. The blast sent sparks across the corridor. Seraphine felt the shockwave pass her face like hot wind. The second guard fired, but Eric ducked and rolled, kicking the alien hard enough to knock him back. He wasn't faster or stronger, just determined. He fought like a man who refused to stop breathing. Seraphine ran to the control panel and slammed her hand on the override. The escape pod door slid open. "Eric, now!" she shouted. He turned, panting, his arm bleeding from a graze, but his eyes were steady. The Admiral was rising again, fury shaking the air. "Go!" Eric shouted back. "Get in!" She shook her head. "Not without you." "Don't argue," he yelled. "This ship's going down." The Admiral's voice thundered one last command, a blast of psychic energy that tore through the hall. The deck cracked. Flames burst from the ceiling. Eric grabbed Seraphine's arm and pulled her into the pod. The door slammed shut just as the chamber exploded in fire and light. Through the small window, Seraphine saw her father's figure vanish in the flames. Her heart twisted, but there was no time to mourn. Eric hit the launch switch. The pod fired from the ship like a bullet, spinning through the void. The dreadnought shrank behind them, breaking apart piece by piece until it vanished in a silent bloom of light. Inside the pod, everything was quiet except for the faint hum of the engines. Seraphine sat across from Eric, her eyes unfocused, her hands trembling. He leaned back, exhaling. "Well," he said softly, "that was intense." She looked at him, still shaken. "You saved me. Again." He smiled tiredly. "You helped me first. Guess we're even." She was silent for a long moment. Then she said, "He was my father. I disobeyed him. I watched him die. I do not know who I am now." Eric's voice was gentle. "You're someone who chose what was right, not what was easy. That's who you are." She stared at him, her throat tightening. "You speak as if it is simple." He shook his head. "It's not. It never is. But it's the only way to stay human." She looked down. "I am not human." He smiled. "You act like one." For a moment, neither spoke. The stars drifted past the window like silver dust. After a while, Seraphine said quietly, "I used to believe fear ruled the universe, that it kept everything in order. But now I see, it only chains the heart." Eric nodded slowly. "Fear's useful, sure, but it shouldn't be in charge." She looked at him. "Then what should rule?" He thought for a moment, then said, "Hope." Always hope. The word hung in the air between them. Hours later, the pod's sensors beeped softly. Seraphin leaned forward. A signal. A Terran ship. Eric smiled faintly. Guess rescue's here. The pod shuddered as docking clamps latched on. A soft hiss filled the air as the hatch opened. 2 human officers appeared in the doorway, their faces filled with shock. "Lieutenant Hale," one shouted. "You're alive." "Mostly," Eric said, standing with a groan. He turned to Seraphin. "Come on." She hesitated. "Your people will not accept me. I am Dominion." He met her gaze. "They will if I tell them who you really are." "And who is that?" she asked quietly. He smiled. "The alien who didn't leave me behind." She followed him out of the pod. The humans helped them aboard, guiding them through bright corridors filled with noise and movement. Seraphin felt strange. Everything looked rough and imperfect, yet full of life. When they reached the medical bay, Eric sat down on a bed, still smiling. She stood nearby, unsure of what to do. A young doctor asked him, "Sir, how did you survive?" Eric looked toward the stars outside the window, then at Seraphin. "Had help," he said simply. Later, when the noise settled and the stars stretched again outside the ship, Seraphin stood beside the viewing glass. Eric joined her, his arm wrapped in a bandage. She spoke softly. "There is still something I do not understand." "What's that?" he asked. She looked at him, her eyes gentle. "Why don't you tremble, human?" He smiled, tired but steady. "Because someone has to stay calm when the stars shake." For a long moment they watched the void together, an alien and a human, survivors of a world that had tried to destroy them both. And somewhere in that quiet space between stars, Seraphin finally understood. Humanity's strength wasn't in weapons or power. It was in the simple, stubborn choice to stand, even when the universe demanded they fall. And for the first time, in her long life, Seraphin felt something she had never truly known before. Not fear, not obedience, but hope.